I have a young relative back in a deep south town who is planning to make a move to Southern California this January. And the reason that he's doing that is because there's virtually no opportunity in this deep south town where he lives. And I think we've reached a point in our history in the United States where more and more people need to leave non-prosperous places and move to more prosperous places. We saw the beginnings of this, a lot of it, when the Affordable Care Act was passed and the Supreme Court ruled that a lot of states did not or could not be required to expand their Medicaid programs. And so the Affordable Care Act, which is going away now, it looks like, basically did not exist for a lot of people in a lot of these states that did not expand their Medicaid program. I was involved with Obamacare for a while, and I used to tell people who would have been eligible for the Medicaid expansion but not in Alabama or anywhere in the South that if they wanted insurance they would have to leave, and that turned out to be true. And that's going to be even more so in the future under the new configuration, whatever Trump Care turns out to be, because apparently they're going to turn Medicaid into block grants to the states. And a lot of states, of course, don't give a damn about their citizens, and that's certainly the case in the Deep South. But this young relative of which I speak did relocate for a time to Denver, Colorado, and actually worked at the stadium where the Broncos play, and made some pretty good money for a while, but unfortunately he had sort of gotten in with the wrong people as far as his housing and buying a car and having some problems with the title, which eventually had to be resolved through a lawsuit back in Alabama because he'd bought the car before he left. But he enjoyed his time tremendously in Alabama. But with regard to this desire to move to more prosperous places, he hears an argument that you often hear in these deep south states, and that is that pay may be better in other parts of the country, but the cost of living is also higher, and so people say that it isn't worth it to move to these other states. Well, I disagree with that. To me, that reinforces something that I was told about Alabama by someone who's a little bit older than I, who told me that in the years following World War II, the smart people left Alabama and the stupid people stayed, and that's who is left. There are people who are so hung up on this Southern culture thing, which is very limited, by the way. What is Southern culture? With the Southern culture that I'm familiar with, it's the football rivalry between Alabama and Auburn, and it's barbecue and maybe country music and not much else. My opinion is that there's just not a lot of culture in the Deep South, and I have a lot of experience with that area of the country, and I don't see a lot of culture there. And one of the craziest things is they say that Southerners are nicer people, that they are friendlier than people from other sections of the country, and that's not true at all. I used to work for, when I was in Alabama, I worked for a payday loan company for a while as a customer service representative, and I would process these idiotic loans that people have to pay ridiculous amounts of money for. And this lady from Detroit came in and she said she'd never been to such a friendly place before, because where she was from in Michigan, nobody that you did business with was actually interested in her personal life. And I explained to you, well, they're not here either. Here it's just being nosy. Here it's just everybody in everybody else's business and trying to figure out how they can take advantage of it, especially in some kind of financial situation. Because in that town of Gadsden, Alabama, and the entire area of North Alabama, basically, con artistry is the #1 business. People with any kind of a product to sell, they want to charge exorbitant rates for whatever that product is. On the other hand, if you try to sell them a service, they want all these low-ball, they want everything for nothing as far as buying a service, but they want to sell you products at ridiculously high prices. And it's really dog-eat-dog economically in some of these southern states. I've seen that over and over again. But people who are proud to live in the South, and the Deep South in particular, I think it can be expanded to the whole South, but the Deep South is probably the worst. They have a lot of pride in their region. Now, it's the poorest region in the United States, there's no doubt about that. poverty always has been, and it looks like it always will be, a tremendous problem in the Deep South. And interestingly enough, that's just about the most conservative part of the United States that there is. They all have low taxes and deregulation. But the jobs that are available in southern states tend not to be that good. Now, they like to brag about manufacturing plants like Honda and Mercedes-Benz and some of those places, but what you have with those places is it's a revolving door. Nobody can stay because those companies are constantly firing people because they're never happy with who they get in these deep south states. And so that doesn't work out for a lot of people. And it's true that the cost of living is low compared to other parts of the country in the deep south, but the quality of life is also low. When you consider the kind of incomes that people have in the south, whether it's money earned from work or whether it's federal transfer payments, disability, or whatever it is, the cost of living does not help you very much there because incomes are so low. So yeah, the cost of living is low, but the quality of life is also very low. And why are so many people on disability in the Deep South anyway? Well, it's because that the jobs that were available to those people were mostly these extreme hard labor jobs where they get to the point where their back is totally ruined and they can't do those jobs anymore. And that's one reason that people are on disability so much in the Deep South, because it's these low-wage, hard labor jobs, and people just get to the point that they can't do it anymore, and then there's nothing left for them, because there are not a lot of jobs that involve being very smart in the Deep South. There's medicine, and there's law, and there's some engineering, and architecture, and accountants, and people in allied health. Yeah, there are some of those jobs, and educators, professors, and people like that, and people who work for NASA, and there are some of those, but those are not the majority of jobs in the Deep South. In the Deep South, what you have, and not only the Deep South, but what you have throughout most of the South is this tremendous lack of opportunity. It's a situation, for example, the situation that exists in Gadsden, Alabama, the town that I'm most familiar with, is that any time there's a decent job opening of any kind, you got about 10 or 15 people who are prime candidates for that job, and they'll call people in and tell them they're interviewing the top 5 or something like that. I'll never forget one time the local jail advertised for people to work for the jail, and the pay wasn't that great. The pay to work in this jail was $10 and something an hour, and yet they didn't have a whole lot of positions open, and yet they got 200 applications in that town. And that's fairly typical. What you have in the Deep South, a lot of low-wage jobs, not much opportunity. The opportunities that do exist, everybody there is competing for them. And so we have a situation that actually I think has existed for a pretty long time, but it's getting a lot worse now, where in order to have any kind of opportunity for success, you have to consider leaving and going to a different part of the country. And there's always this argument that the cost of living is higher. And yes, that's true, but wages and salaries are also higher. And if you really want to do the research, you can find out that these higher wage states are much richer than the southern states, because you can get rankings of richest states and poorest states, and it's all about how well the people are doing there. And so yes, the cost of living might be way higher in Seattle, but the quality of life is also a lot better in Seattle. I know a young person right now who's planning to hopefully next spring go start a new life in Seattle, and he's catching a lot of flack. But Seattle offers a lot of things that the Deep South doesn't offer. There's all kind of culture available. There's all kind of public transportation available. People are more health-minded. People are more progressive. There's all kinds of recreational opportunities that simply don't exist in the Deep South. And even though the cost of living is higher, his quality of life is going to be much better. Now, one complaint that I hear from some people in the South, and this sounds so stupid actually, is that they miss their sweet iced tea if they go somewhere else. Well, I promise you that tea bags and sugar are available everywhere in the United States. And it's not that hard. All you got to do to make iced tea is you get your tea bags, and you put them in the filter area of your coffee maker, then you fill the coffee maker with water, then you just brew the tea. And then you pour it in some kind of a pitcher and you mix in the sugar, and there you are. You've got iced tea. And I like to add a little cinnamon sometimes too. But it's not that hard to make, and if it's restaurant availability that has people so upset about their sweet tea, well, then I'd say you're probably spending too much money on eating out anyway. I mean, I like good Italian meals, good Tex-Mex meals, good quintessentially American meals, and things of that nature, but, I don't do that but more than a couple of times a week, because you're definitely spending a lot more money with the restaurant meal. But sweet tea is not really a problem. However, the quality of life is much better. And when, people tried to tell my young relative that he's not going to do well because the cost of living is so high, in regard to Denver, he tells them, look, it's just rent. It's everything else. The differences aren't that great. It's just rent. It's just housing. And truly in the United States, we don't have cheap housing per se. Now, there's the Section 8 program, and I've seen some fairly nice tax credit properties, and there's always bad areas that you could move to, but even those areas are more expensive than you would think. Cheap housing, there's, in my opinion, just not a lot of it in the United States. It's always going to be tremendously expensive. And the reason that real estate prices are always higher in places like Seattle, Washington, and on the West Coast, well, think about it for a minute. It's because people want to live there. Compared to the Deep South, people definitely don't want to live there. And that's one of the reasons that real estate prices are so low compared to the West Coast and places like Seattle, Washington. And with regard to job growth, California's had a lot of good high-paying job growth. It's one of the few areas that has in recent years. The state of California has had good high-paying, high-salary job growth, and minimum wages are rising too on the West Coast, and that has worked out very well. They like to, in the Deep South, they like to say all kind of businesses have had to close. That hasn't been true on the West Coast, and it hasn't been true in Seattle. I fully believe that people in areas of the United States that are just never going to be prosperous, that if they ever want to have the opportunities that they deserve, the smart people, that they're going to have to think about moving to completely different sections of the country where the opportunities are. Because yes, the cost of living is more, but the quality of life is also better. You can see rankings of richest states to poorest states. And those areas where the wages are better, the quality of life is also better. You can see that those states are richer than these poor states. So I think it's, this relative of mine who wants to move to L.A., I think he's on the right track. Somebody asked him would he stay if he got a job with the local Goodyear plant, which is one of the best paying jobs in the area, and he said no, it wouldn't take $500,000 to live there a year, because what is there in that area? There's not that much. I mean, in Gadsden, Alabama, you can only go see Nakalula Falls so many times. I mean, really, there's just not that much in that area. So I'm a big proponent of, if you want to do well economically, then you need to go where the opportunities are. And I think that's the way it's going to be in the future. So if you're stuck in the small town South somewhere, or any other area, maybe on the Great Plains, where opportunities don't exist, then you should plan to go where opportunities exist. Got one more thing to say in this video. Some people saw the title of it and they thought they knew what I was going to be talking about in this video, and they turned out to be wrong. The well-justified mudslinging isn't going to be that overt. It is going to happen, but it's not going to be that overt. I have a good idea what I can get by with saying and what I can't. So, if you saw the title and you thought you knew what I was going to be talking about and it turned out to be different, well, I guess the joke's on you. But the message I want to get across is, if you want opportunities, then in the future it's going to be very important to go where those opportunities are. That's what you're going to have to do if you want to achieve economic success. Thanks, and have a good day.